In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes. The order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Stigmata Studios presents The Jinn Jihad. The Jinn Jihad kicks your face with myths, mysteries, epic battles, suicide bombers, quirky characters, and divine power armor. In this epic graphic novel, the warrior archangels descend on a city in chaos. It's all-out war. The non-standard assembly battles an ancient terrorist organization and their ultimate weapon, the corrupted, magically enhanced, unstoppable monster, the Jinn. This graphic novel is a wild ride. It's one part distant Arab myth, one part Old Testament angelic vengeance, and one part unique heroic tough guys. Available on Amazon. Get more info on the Jinn Jihad and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
Sometimes I try to do things and it just doesn't work out the way I want it to. And I get real frustrated. And I'm like, I try hard to do it. And I'm like, take my time. And it doesn't work out the way I want it to. It's like I concentrate real hard, but it doesn't work out. And everything I do and everything I try never turns out. It's like I need time to figure these things out. There's always someone there going, hey, Mike, I know, we've been noticing that you've been having a lot of problems lately. You know, you should maybe get away and maybe you should talk about it. You'll feel a lot better. And I go, no, it's okay. I'll figure it out. Just leave me alone and I'll figure it out. I'll just work it out myself. And they go, well, if you want to talk about it, I'll be here, and you'll probably feel a lot better if you talked about it. So why don't you just talk about it? And I go, no, I don't want to. I'm okay. I'll figure it out myself. And they just keep bugging me. And they just keep bugging me. And it builds up inside. You're going to be institutionalized. You'll come out brainwashed with bloodshot eyes. You don't have any say. They'll brainwash you till you see their way. I'm not crazy, institution. You're the one who's crazy, institution. You're driving me crazy, institution. They stuck me in an institution, said it was the only solution, to give me the needed professional help to protect me from the enemy, myself. I was in my room and I was just staring at the wall, thinking about everything, but then again, thinking about nothing. And then my mom came in and I didn't even know she was there. She called my name and I didn't even hear it. And then she started screaming, Mike, Mike. And then I go, what? What's the matter? And she goes, what's the matter with you? I go, there's nothing wrong, Mom. And she goes, don't tell me that. You're on drugs. I go, no, Mom, I'm not on drugs. I'm okay. I was just thinking, why don't you go get me a Pepsi? And she goes, no, you're on drugs. And I go, Mom, I'm okay. I'm just thinking. And she goes, you're not thinking. You're on drugs. Normal people don't act that way. And I go, Mom, just give me a Pepsi, please. All I want is a Pepsi. And she wouldn't give it to me. All I wanted was a Pepsi. Just one Pepsi. And she wouldn't give it to me. just a Pepsi. They give you a white shirt with long sleeves tied around your back, and you're treated like thieves. Drug you up because they're lazy. It's too much work to help a crazy. I'm not crazy, institution. You're the one who's crazy, institution. You're driving me crazy, institution. They stuck me in an institution. They said it was the only solution. To give me the needed professional help to protect me from the enemy, myself. I'm sitting in my room and my mom and dad come in. They pull up a chair and they sit down and they go, Mike, we need to talk to you. And I go, okay, what's the matter? And they go, me and your mom have been noticing lately that you've been having a lot of problems. You've been going off for no reason, and we're afraid you're going to hurt somebody. We're afraid you're going to hurt yourself. So we decided that it would be in your best interest if we put you somewhere where you could get the help that you need. And I go, wait, what are you talking about? We decided. My best interest? How can you know what my best interest is? How can you say what my best interest is? What are you trying to say? I'm crazy? When I went to your schools, I went to your churches, and I went to your institutional learning facilities. How can you say I'm crazy? They say they're going to fix my brain, alleviate my suffering and my pain. But by the time they fix my head, mentally, I'll be dead. I'm not crazy, institution. You're the one who's crazy, institution. You're driving me crazy, institution. They stuck me in an institution. Said it was the only solution. To give me the needed professional help to protect me from the enemy. Myself. It doesn't matter. I'll probably get hit by a car anyways. Suicidal tendencies. Institutionalized. She's got a date at midnight with Nosferatu. Oh baby, Lily Monster, it's got nothing on you. But if you call her evil, she'll just laugh. She'll
The
cast that
Abercast.
spell on
Occult.
you.
History. Conspiracy.
Witchcraft.
Violence.
Black, number one. All right, everybody, happy Halloween. This is Abercast. I'm your main man, John Towers. Hey, so this is a fun Halloween episode. We'll get to why I chose it in a little bit. But there's a few things. You guys all know I'm a Marvel, as far as movies is concerned nowadays, I'm a Marvel guy. And Thor Ragnarok is coming out super fast. So if you want, you can tune into the Abercast Classic. The classic Ragnarok, episode 28, where I tell you the story of the Norse myth of actually what Ragnarok is. I have not seen the movie, so I know, but like, of course it's not going to be about Ragnarok, but there you go. If you want to tune in and get to it, and you want to hear about the Norse mythology part of it, rather than the Hulk punching Fenris the wolf in the face and smashing Surtur. There it is. It's a dying kind of thing. In 2 generations, everybody, when you say Ragnarok, everyone's going to think of this fucking movie. So I'm sure it's a great movie. It looks fun and all that stuff. But let's get down to the roots of it. When I hear Ragnarok, the first thing I think of is that Gwar CD, Ragnarok and Roll. Ragnarok and Roll. It's a lot of music themes already emerging in this episode. We're already a few minutes in, and we've done Suicidal Tendencies, Typo Negative, and Gwar already. Also, the big thing to keep on the radar this week is they just did the JFK assassination dump. So what happened, I guess, is in 1992. I actually kind of remember something about this. I remember, George Bush Sr., I know that he did this, but I vaguely remember something about it, saying that they're going to release, these JFK, all these JFK assassination paper documents or whatever. And I remember being like, God, when that gets released, the whole thing is predicated on that JFK, the Oliver Stone movie, which is so good. It's a good movie, but it's historically inaccurate all over the place. Just all over the place. It literally takes a shit on all, the history, the actual event of what happened. But the movie's great. It's one of those movies that has everybody before they were super huge in it. It's like MASH did, or The Breakfast Club, I guess. But this is in direct response to Oliver Stone's movie. It bubbled, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, I saw that movie. I know that there's a conspiracy." So W's dad was like, "All right, fine," and a bunch of years, we're going to go ahead and release it, unless the president at the time doesn't want to release it, I guess was the stipulation. So I guess they're going to be releasing a bunch of it. I haven't looked at any of it yet. I know people, newspapers in England are going bananas for it. So there you go. I haven't done a JFK assassination episode, but I've done enough episodes about that tertiarily bleed into JFK that you probably, if you listen to the show enough, know that I actually don't fucking care. He was an awful president. He was terrifyingly inept. Terrifyingly inept. Now that everyone's tuned out, now that everyone's turned me off, let's actually get into my notes. Oh, I want you guys to support the show. There's great ways to do it. I did not check iTunes before I started up tonight because I'm kind of in a hurry. Me and the lady are carving pumpkins as soon as I get done recording. So, I want you guys to support the show. You can rate and review in iTunes. I swear if you left a message or if you left a rate and review that I didn't catch this time around, I'll get it next week. I promise. You could buy the books. That's actually the best way to support the show. If you never want to type a review, you never want to help me out for free, but you want to buy a book and help me pay for stuff, that would be awesome. Chances are, if you like the shit we talk about on the show, you'll like the comic book stories anyways. The other free way you could do it is just tell a friend. If you are a weirdo that likes the shit we talk about, you probably know another weirdo that would like the show anyways. Give you guys something to talk about over the water cooler or whatever. Hopefully it's over some gin jihads. Pour some jihads for yourself and your friend and talk about the show. I call this part the spreading the disease portion of the notes. So come on, guys, support the show. Listenership is going up, and I love that. So let's what do they say? And let's nail it right in the bud. Let's just fuck it right in the ass. Let's get it done. And also just remember, I don't spend you guys' time shilling for boxes of granola or underpants. I don't understand where these fucking guys are they're talking about whatever. They're talking about some great topic and they're like, well, let's take a break and talk about bras. I don't understand. So look, I'm trying to keep it all relevant. Speaking of relevant, my new book, Revenge in a Saloon Called Hell, is now out and about. I don't have a spot for it yet. I need to plan on one of these guys to fucking record a spot for me because I don't like to do it. Coming up right after that is The Brass City. And there's going to be 2 or 3 more books right after that, like coming right out. I'm actually starting to tinker around with this new idea. I think I might change the ending of this whole arc. So, I don't know. This is all inside. I shouldn't even be talking about this right now. So I'm just going to move on. I've always been fascinated by insane asylums for reasons I'll get to later on in the episode. But for this week's episode, it's the Halloween episode. I'm going to tell you the story of the Dixmont State Hospital, or the Dixmont Insane Asylum. Mix yourself up a gin jihad, strap it to a bed, and lobotomize it with an ice pick, because we're going to get right into this. Booyah Tribe, booyah. That's another one. I don't know where that comes from. I don't even understand. I don't even really like the Booyah Tribe. All right, so what was Dixmont Insane Asylum? So it's an insane asylum. I'm going to get into the particulars of it later, but first we're going to talk about something called a Kirkbride building. Kirkbride building. Kirkbride planned institutions with a main building that had 2 wings that were a shallow V that swept back. It's named after the guy who designed it, Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride. Wrote a book called On the General Construction, Organization, and General Arrangements of Hospitals for the Insane. This guy, I think rightly so, decided that fresh air and natural light was a huge factor in mental health. So that's okay. So if you can, I'm gonna talk a lot about this. Not a lot, because I'm not gonna fucking bore everybody to death. But I am gonna talk a little bit about this Kirkbride design. So it's this main hall. In Dixmont case, it was 4 stories high. So that's the main hall, and you're looking at it. And from each side, spread out wings. And for each wing, like they would separate it. This guy, I think. His idea was to separate it by sexes. So you had this huge long wing stretching out from one side, huge long wing stretching out from the other. And to capitalize on the natural light and to create a breeze, he would gently sweep these wings back, forming a shallow V. So if you're looking at an aerial view of any of these Kirkbride buildings, you would see like the block, that's the main hall, and then like 2 long wings that came out from either side, and this would help create a breeze going through, providing airflow and fresh air to the patients, and also it would take advantage of the natural light. However, Dixmont was different. Dixmont was built right basically in the valley of the Ohio River. So in order to take advantage of the natural light and the airflow being caused by the river, like, you know, when you get near rivers, like you see hawks and stuff. I mean, they do this everywhere, but like you see them a lot. Like I mean, I'm right here on the Ohio, in like my house overlooks the Ohio River, and you see hawks and stuff. Just they're floating on these gigantic air currents that's being caused by this valley and by the airflow. So to capitalize on this, they modified the Kirkbride design to sweep the wings of the insane asylum forward, and it's on this giant hill. And if you didn't know it was there, when I first moved here, I didn't know it was there. Like, you could see some of the buildings from the highway from 65, but you couldn't see the main building at all. It was amazing once I finally figured out where it was, because I was like, "Fuck!" It's like right there. But there's this huge hill, and it was up on this huge, gigantic hill, and of course they wanted to keep it out of view because it's not there to be a zoo. I mean, maybe. I don't know. But let's see. Okay, so they were using it. So let's do some of the history of the Dixmont. They call it the Dixmont State Hospital. I got this information from Asylum Projects, which is a website, and it's like a wiki kind of site, and they go through and they're like cataloging all these hospitals. So the Western Pennsylvania Hospital was founded in Pittsburgh in 1848 as a general hospital that treated all types of illnesses and became the first institution in Western Pennsylvania to offer treatment for the insane. When the insane department of the Western Pennsylvania Hospital was moved to the new building in Kilbuck Township outside of Pittsburgh in 1862, it was renamed the Western Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane at Dixmont to honor the memory of Dorothea Dix, who was an advocate for reforming the treatment of mental patients. The Dixmont Hospital was legally separated from the Western Pennsylvania Hospital in 1907. It was individually incorporated as the Dixmont Hospital for the Insane, supported by private contributions since 1852. It was primarily state appropriations that enabled the hospital to expand its facilities and care for the increasing number of mentally ill persons over the first 9 decades of its existence. Despite receiving state appropriations, it nonetheless continued to operate as a private corporation until 1945, when it was taken over by, the government. The Department of Public Welfare. From that date, it operated under the new name, the Dixmont State Hospital, until it closed in July of 1984. The Western Pennsylvania Hospital was one of the earlier asylums built on the Kirkbride plan, which I already told you all about. You're already experts in this thing, with 3 crooked wings stretching to each side of the administration building, one wing for male, the other for female patients, and by the end of the 1800s, the residents' population grew over 1,200, and a nursing school was established in 1895. As with most asylums, Dixmont became overcrowded to the point where it was not accepting new admissions. During the Great Depression, the hospital tried to sustain itself by paying employees with only room and board, not salaries. Sold any crafts any crafts made by the patients for extra income. That happened until, I don't know when it happened until, but so in the 60s, I think, is when it happened. They start rolling out. It's actually because of JFK. This is hilarious. It's actually because of JFK. His sister, I think we're going to get into it later. I think it's in the notes later, but his sister was a victim of like a botched lobotomy, and she had the faculties of a infant. And so he kind of, with this thing, I guess he kind of like rolled out this patient's rights thing, which actually was a huge disservice to these people, because instead of them actually having a function, like something to do, like get up and make crafts that people go and fucking sell somewhere, instead of that, then they just get like a rocking chair, and they have to sit there in their own fucking hell, drugged to death, rocking in their chair because they weren't allowed to work anymore. Again, like I said, that's the last time, unless I run into it again in my notes, then I'll say whatever my notes say. Sold any crafts made by the patients for extra income. By 46, the state had to step in. They had to step in. And the institution became known as the Dixmont State Hospital. Financial troubles still plagued the hospital until it finally closed in 1984. A fire partially destroyed the administration building. We're going to get into a lot of that later. Okay, so that's all for the Asylum Projects page, and I'm going to just kind of go... Hold on. we're going to move to a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article written in 2003 called "A Mental Hospital's Breakdown." Opened during the Civil War and closed in 1984, Dixmont awaits its inevitable demolition. We're going to skip into this a little bit. If these walls could talk. If the peeling, graffiti-covered walls of Dixmont State Hospital could talk, they would tell 1,000 stories about people whose illnesses, idiosyncrasies landed them there. Stories about how treatment of the mentally ill in America has changed since the 1800s. Dixmont is the oldest mental institution in western Pennsylvania. It opened in 1862 and was originally known as the Department of the Insane in the Western Pennsylvania Hospital of Pittsburgh. It was named in honor of Dorothea Dix, a noted social reformer who rallied against housing of mentally ill in jails or poorhouses around the nation. She lobbied for its construction, selected the site where it was built, and established a library for the patients who spent time there in 1876 as a guest of Dr. Joseph Reed, the first superintendent of the institution. When Dixmont opened its doors in 1862, its initial population was 113 patients transferred from the Western Pennsylvania Hospital in Pittsburgh, which had just opened the insane department a decade earlier. Skipping forward a little bit, Johnson said that the hospital cared for both patients who were indigent and those who could afford to pay. Some of the lifelong residents included Civil War veterans. In the early days, members of the wealthy families came to Dixmont for summer of rest and medical care. It was more of like a spa than anything, because they could afford to pay for it. They received better services. Private patients usually were alcoholics who were sent there to dry out, Johnson said. They were served different meals than the regular patients. In better times, photos of Dixmont reflected an almost genteel lifestyle. So from there, the hospital kept growing, and at one point in time had a huge greenhouse, which was, I'm sure it was nice. It reminds me, this whole thing so far reminds me of like an Edward Gorey, illustrative story of Edward Gorey. You're like, Towers, I don't know who Edward Gorey is. Fucking Google it. Patients were segregated by sex. This is in 1895, training school for nurses were established in the institution. Imagine that. Imagine being a young nurse in training and having to deal with all these crazy people. Patients were segregated by sex. Active and disturbed patients were kept in one ward, and they were sometimes restrained in straitjackets and leather hand and leg cuffs. Through the years, treatments for mental illness, some of them now regarded as barbaric, were tried on patients. Remains of hydrotherapy tubs indicate the mental patients at Dixmont were submerged for hours in long baths, sometimes in hot or cold water. In a treatment that was popular in the late 1800s and might involve applying ice caps to the head or bandages wrapped around their eyes and ears to shut out other sensations. What they're talking about, they're talking about like this different temperatures and stuff, but what they're also talking about is sensory deprivation, which when I was a kid, I watched Altered States, and the whole idea of sensory deprivation tanks scared the shit out of me. Like, I'm going to come out, I'm going to be a caveman, and I'm going to eventually devolve into an amoeba? No thanks. They also sprayed them with water hoses, Johnson said, because that sounds therapeutic. So I saw some of these tanks and stuff before. What they're talking about, the baths or tanks. I've seen some of these instruments, but we'll get to that later. In 1907, Dixmont was legally separated from the Western Pennsylvania Hospital and individually incorporated as Dixmont Hospital for the Insane. A sewing room opened the following year. Everything that was worn or used by the inmates is made by them as far as possible, the Pittsburgh Dispatch reported in a 1912 article. The story added that 25 to 30 women who delighted in making clothing were also happily engaged in repairing shoes and producing mattresses and pillows. I don't doubt this. I think that this is probably the best therapy that these poor people could have. Not poor people, but these people that are patients here could have. Because you give someone a purpose, and that becomes a reason for them. Like, that's what they say. Like, you have people that are like passing away, or old people, and they get they get an animal that they're like responsible for, and they'll keep plugging on, you know. But we're gonna get into the bad side, not the bad side, the different aspect of this. In 1912, population had grown so large the staff refused to accept new admissions. By 1926, about 138 patients were living at Dixmont. And someone that's been at Dixmont, that is, I can't even fathom 1,038 people living in this building. The building is huge, but it is not like there's like rooms. That number is hard for me to wrap my head around. Back to the article, during the Great Depression in the 1930s, employees worked for room and board and did not get salaries. Also, imagine that. Imagine that you're so fucked that you need to work in an insane asylum just for a place to sleep and to get food. I mean, back to I'm going to restrain talking about it. Patients who could afford to pay their own way received special privileges, and they could buy special meals on Sundays for $1.25. Despite the attempts at self-sufficiency, by 1946, the institution was in deep financial trouble. That's when the state acquired, and it renamed it the Dixmont State Hospital. They're making it nicer. It's all nicer now. So this is, I mean, it's been difficult, but this is where we get going. This is where we get revved up. In the 1940s and 50s, mental hospitals around the country began using electroshock therapy to dull the intellects of their patients and to quiet the wards of mental hospitals. Doctors also began using experimental prefrontal lobotomies. It's the surgical removal of the frontal lobe of the brain and try to cure mental illness. It doesn't actually have to be the surgical removal of the frontal lobe of the brain. They use some of these doctors around this time would actually do this as an outpatient treatment. It's called, in the modern parlance, an ice pick lobotomy, where they get a guy, they would electroshock him into submission, and then they would stick a ice pick. They would pry open his eyelid, and they would stick a ice pick in through, like, past like the orb of his eye into the cavity, into the eye socket cavity, into the back. So there's a real super thin, like people that look at Halloween decorations and stuff, like the eyes just aren't black holes that lead into the brain. There's a thin portion of bone there. So what they do is they hold the eyelid up, and then they stick an ice pick through the orb. It's important. It's an ice pick. It's not a screwdriver, because it has to be round. It has to work with the eyeball. And you get back there, and you feel the bone where the plate, like the bone, the plate is back there. And they would have a hammer, and they would just pop, pow, a couple hits, and it would like break through the thin layer of the bone in the back of the eye socket right into your brain. And then they would twist it and disconnect that part of the brain with like the inner like mucousy part, effectively like shutting that off from getting to where your thinking parts are. And they just pull it out, bandage up your eyes, and off you would go. Like I said, there were doctors that were so, they call it cavalier. There were doctors that were so cavalier with this surgery that they would do it as outpatient. Imagine wheeling somebody in, electroshocking the shit out of them, punching a couple holes in their eyes and their brains, and then being like, all right, I'll send my bill to your house, Bill. See you later. Bill, Ted. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know where that came from. but they were trying. They thought they were trying to cure mental illness, or at least quiet the wards. Female ward. Once a female ward was used for electroshock therapy and insulin shock therapy. This is when they would fuck with your blood sugar to put you in shock. Repeatedly putting patients into hypoglycemic comas to try to change their behavior. And one male ward was used as the untidy ward, where patients were tied in bed with handcuffs and leg cuffs. So this all seems like a nightmare to me. Like, I can't find any good things here that I would like to witness or be part of. Between 55 and 57, the hospital began using dramatic new drugs, including Thorazine, to treat the mentally ill. Huge deficits continued, and by the 60s, the philosophy for treating the mentally ill began to change, because our savior, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, whose sister Rosemary functioned at the level of an infant after undergoing prefrontal lobotomy, pushed a new approach to reestablish a community-based system of helping the mentally ill. All right, we're actually going to jump to another article. Oh my God. It's from nwpastories.com. It's called the Dixmont Asylum for the Insane, Sanity and Insanity in the Oil Region. This is going to cover a little bit of the same ground, but I'm going to go for it. Are you ready? Here we go. Towering on a hilltop near Pittsburgh, set Dixmont Asylum for the Insane, later renamed Dixmont State Hospital. Active from 1862 through 1984, Dixmont State Hospital was demolished in shit. Hold on. I'm going to skip past that. Spoilers. More than a few residents of Erie, Crawford, Warren, and Venango counties were sent to Dixmont at some point in their lives for alleged insanity. See, this is the shit that scares me. I grew up watching MASH, son. Like, I don't want to ever be interned when I'm not. I don't want to be interned when I'm crazy, let alone when I'm not crazy. More on my hang up with this later. Through the institution, undoubtedly aided many people who desperately needed intervention for their mental health. There were also many who were sent for social infractions instead of mental illness. For example, in November 21st, 1874, Titusville Herald, an article described how the wife of G.W. Baldwin was taken to Dixmont because she was a victim of, quote, religious frenzy, unquote, and was, quote, deranged, unquote, due to her participation in a revival. Around this time, what they're talking about is a tent revival. They have these evangelicals that travel from town to town, and it's like a circus, but it's like religious, so it's even crazier. And they will whip these people up into frenzies, and she was obviously deranged with religious frenzy. She was the second person from that area in a span of only 2 months to be admitted to Dixmont for religious frenzy. A doctor from Erie referred to in the Titusville Herald as Dr. Seven. Now, that's not the George Costanza, S-E-V-E-N, it's S-E-V-I-N, was a, quote, inmate, unquote, at the Dixmont for 8 years, and in 1883 accused the institution of a litany of abuses. He explained that he had gone to Dixmont, quote, of his own accord, but was afterwards unable to get out. He claimed that he wrote numerous letters to friends, but none had received his letters. Dr. Seven went on to say that he was thrown down numerous times, punched by attendants. He also knew people who were completely sane and were not allowed to leave the asylum. So here's the thing, like back in these days, in order to get committed, you only needed 2 doctors to sign your paperwork to get committed, but you needed 8 signatures from medical professionals to get out. So you can see these people. This is global warming. You know, these people are paid to fucking keep you locked up. They're paid to keep you in fear. They're paid to keep you crazy. So they're not going to let you go. After Dr. Seven accused Dixmont of abuse, other patients came forward. A.P. Hopkins of Rochester, Pennsylvania, was kept at Dixmont for 6 months in 1882. The Titus View Herald recounted his testimony. Quote, during his stay, he had been subject to cruel treatment on several occasions. One time he rebelled against being placed in a straitjacket, because what sane human being wouldn't rebel at being placed in a straitjacket, and was struck back to the thing, I'm sorry, and was struck by the attendant. He was thrown down, choked, and jumped on with his knees breaking 2 of his ribs. On other occasions, he was tied to bedstands for 2 days, and the pinions around his arms being so tight the circulation had stopped. He went on to testify that he witnessed other patients being choked and similarly abused as well. Though the state of Pennsylvania, quote, investigated, unquote, these alleged abuses, it ultimately chose to believe the testimony of 2 doctors who discounted all patients' testimonies on the account that no sane person could trust someone in an insane asylum. Dixmont administration denied all allegations and were found to be innocent. Though Dr. Seven eventually recanted his testimony, Dixmont patients were stuck between a rock and a hard space. Accuse the institution of abuse and be discredited because of the improbability of a sane person in an insane asylum? Think of poor Mike, everybody. That's what I want you to say. Think of poor Mike. All he wanted was a Pepsi. Back to the article, or withstand the abuse and possibly be harmed or worse. Or worse, meaning be kept in there for 8 years. Were the people in Dixmont mentally ill? Some certainly were, but not all. Did abuse occur? Knowing the history of mental health in the U.S. during the late 1800s and early 1900s, it's extremely likely that at least some of the accusations were rooted in truth. In 1880, Dixmont patients were hailed from the Tri-Country area and began being transported to the new asylum in Warren County, the state hospital for the insane at Warren. Now Warren State Hospital, both asylums were built by the Kirkbride model, which you people are all experts in by now, which was intended to pull air through the building for air conditioning and circulation. It was posited that fresh air and natural light were essential to mental healing. And this is exactly why your cubicle has recycled filtered air and fluorescent lights. They're driving us all fucking crazy. This article was written by Jessica Hilburn on June 14th, 2017. And like I said, it could be found at nwpastories.com. Okay, so we're all familiar with the stories that take place in hospitals like this, stories of people getting committed. Like I mentioned before, 2 signatures needed by medical professionals to get committed, but 8 signatures needed to be obtained before you can get out. And they should never be able to get out. I mean, they're never able to get out. They're forced to putting up with, I don't want to say the word crazy. They're putting up with mentally ill inmates. They're putting up with bizarre treatments like dunking in water and electroshock therapy and like putting ice caps on you, like on your brain, and sensory deprivation. They're in captivity, strapped to a bed, drugged up in perpetuity, listening to the terrifying screams or laughter of these inmates, naked, covered in, I guess human shit. We've all seen these pictures. It's like a nightmare being trapped in one of these things. So back to the Trib article. The state of Pennsylvania continues to preserve a 1-acre cemetery where 1,300 former patients were buried, and soon it will be the only reminder of an almost forgotten era. So these 1,300 souls laid to rest on the property still remain, buried in wicker coffins marked by a small stone with no name or dates, just a number on it for the rest of time. By the time it closed in 84, it had 12 buildings, and they were all connected by a spider web of underground service tunnels. They also served as storage and bathrooms and stuff. The buildings included a water reservoir, a filtration plant, a power plant that you could see right from 65 when you're driving by back in the day. There was workshops, a gymnasium, a laundry facility. It was basically like a city all by itself. It was like a city of sick people, being run like all by itself. When they wound up closing in 84, the dozens of patients that were still around when the doors were closed eventually were put on the streets, where some of them, even now, shamble around downtown Pittsburgh, harassing art school kids for spare change and cigarettes. All right, so after it was closed in 84, the buildings all sat as the state tried to figure out how to repurpose the hospital. There were some talks about knocking the hospital down or refurbishing it somehow and making a new jail for it. In 1995, Reed Hall was a victim of arson, and it was burned up the upper levels of the main building. So remember when I was talking about the Kirkbridge thing, and I said that there's like the main hall, which is like 4 stories tall, and then like the different wings that came outside. So what I'm saying is that an arsonist burned down the 4-story main hall. They caught a fire on the upper levels of it, totally destroying the chapel and a clutch of bedrooms. There had been 24-hour security on site since the late 80s because the fire chief or whatever of Killbuck County had said, now they say this thing's in Pittsburgh. It's actually a little bit outside of Pittsburgh. You guys can Google search it and run the maps and stuff and figure out where it's at. Go to the DixmontHospital.com. It gives you pretty solid ground, like the layout of the ground there. However, the Killbuck County fire chief, I think it was him, somebody said that leaving the buildings up would be inviting arsonists, and he was true in 1995. That's why they hired the security, because they were trying to figure out what to do with the buildings. But he caught it on fire. There had been 24-hour security on the site since the 80s, but 911 wasn't called until motorists on 65 saw the flames coming from the top of the hill. Once fire crews got there, they had a rough time with it because all of the water had been turned off. All of the internal pumping stations and stuff had been flooded and no longer worked or whatever. So they had a hard time putting it out, but eventually they did get it. They did get it put out. So we're going to move into the second portion of this episode. All right. Now. All right. Places like this are always said to be haunted. And in Dixmont's case, well, I mean, what is it? Is it the decrepitude of the buildings? Is it the vastness of the man-made caverns that have been abandoned? Is it the suffering of the patients that we think of, or their madness? There are so many ghost stories about Dixmont, but they're just general. It's just generally haunted. However, there is said to be a tall male presence in the morgue that frightens people away. On the website www.hauntedplaces.org, in their Dixmont section, a user named James Dodge writes, I grew up a mile away from Dixmont State Hospital. I remember it very well. I cleaned up a lot of his grammar, by the way. I grew up a mile away from Dixmont State Hospital. I remember very well when it was closed in 1984. From 84 to 90, I was there numerous times. One thing I know for sure, I've seen demons and ghosts in the land, and they won't be able to build on it ever. Too much negative energy that will never go away. All right, so for Halloween, I'm going to finish this episode by telling you a personal story. I'm not going to tell you about getting in a fist fight with a juggalo in a haunted maze. I'm not going to tell you about getting held up by knife point in Elyria, Ohio when I was a teenager. I am going to tell you about my first trip to Dixmont. All right, I approached into Reed Hall from the southmost door. So if you were standing on top of the 4-story portion of Reed Hall, like where the 2 wings come out from, if you were standing on it facing the same direction as the door, I was moving in from the leftist most wing of the main building. Being on the property was weird. As soon as I stepped on the property, I felt weird. I don't know why. The state of the building exterior was dilapidated. The property was overgrown, and it caused a problem. I don't know if you guys have ever been in like an abandoned building. I've been around a lot of abandoned buildings, but I'm usually like running around throwing rocks through stuff or like whatever. So that's the reason why I'm nervous. Being there, just walking around. So I made my way inside. We went inside and I'm confronted with this long corridor, and it's just layers of paint just chipping and peeling from the walls. And on each side of the corridor were these tiny little rooms to each side, and everything was quiet. I was probably the only person, for miles, at least acres, that was in this. I didn't hear bugs. I didn't hear animals. Nothing. It was just totally quiet. And I was nervous. Why? Why was I nervous? I was nervous because it was so quiet. I was nervous, because of the stories that I had heard. See, I was nervous. This is why I was actually nervous. I was familiar with places like this. When I was a kid, my dad would take me to visit my grandfather, who was committed, and he lived his last in a psych ward of a VA hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. He got in a little bit of hot water when he hid in the basement of our. He hid in the laundry room in the basement of our apartment complex, and stabbed a woman he thought was my stepmother at the time. He was a dangerous schizophrenic. He was a dangerous schizophrenic who heard religious voices. I always hated visiting the VA hospital. It's actually why I don't use the VA medical care to this day. Like, I say it's like, well, because, other guys need it way more than I do. I still, like, whatever. But the reason is because I remember going to the VA hospital and visiting my granddad when he was still alive. Where was I? So it's quiet, and I'm walking through these long like the perspective. Like I'm walking through these corridors, and like there's these like little dorm rooms on each side. And I start walking down the corridor to make it through, and there's like creak, and then slam, slam, slam. And I'm thinking right now, like when I'm remembering how terrified I was, I'm just walking down this hallway, and all of a sudden these doors start slamming all. You know, I'm a level-headed guy with a mostly skeptical mind, but I was freaked out. The doors all down the side hall just started slamming. Closed one by one all the way down the hall that was in front of me. The doors had no handles. And it took me a second to realize the doors had no handles and the windows were all busted and removed. I was actually seeing, you know, what I know now is the Kirkbride design in real time. You know, a breeze would run through all these open windows, and all the doors in these like little dormitory rooms would slam shut. So they removed the door handles, but they left the doors up. I found access to the basement area, which I went down, and actually it was just a hub of service tunnels. It was pitch dark. There was no or little covered windows. There were medical records down there, like filing cabinets full of medical records. There was equipment, gurneys, wheelchairs. There were back braces, restraint straps hanging up, and long forgotten children's toys. Made our way back upstairs. The side rooms with bizarre looking medical equipment, these weird shaped toilets or urinals. I'm not sure. They were some kind of hydrotherapy things. And in that same room, there were like electrical equipment strapped to the wall. And I started thinking of like electroshock therapy, and like the lobotomies, like we talked about, and treating these with insane methods. You know, I know people in my life nowadays dealing with mental illness, and I kind of get freaked out when I think about my visits to Dixmont a little, because who knows how much of these people, you know, they just need a hug or a Xanax or something, and instead they wound up like getting like strapped down and like electroshock therapy or some kind of like dunking water torture kind of stuff, you know, or like you're drugged into oblivion, you know. And I think looking at it, you know, through this like periscope of time or something, like it's easy just to be like, fuck, man, Jesus Christ, like there's a lot of, you know, it's a lot of fucked up stuff out there. Anyhow, we're making our way through the building. There's pentagram graffitis, and once you get to so I'm making my way up to. I'm in the center of Reed Hall, like the 4-story structure where the 2 different wings come out of. I'm making my way up the stairs, and there's like some pentagram graffiti. And once you get up to like the 3rd or 3.5 floor or so, you're actually standing outside, and this is where the arsonist torched the chapel. So it's like you're walking your way up the stairs, and it's just like all of a sudden you find yourself like out in nature. So, you know, you're looking at the chapel that had been like, that was there, like torched. You're looking at like where the chapel was. And you start thinking of all the crazy things, all the crazy words that were spoke here in this place. So I left, and on my way out, I passed the Hutchins building, which was one of the newer buildings. It was a medical lab kind of building, and I climbed through the broken window. It was like breaking into my 7th grade science lab of my memory. I've heard of the ghost in the morgue, and I wanted to find the morgue. So when you go into I climbed through the broken window. When I got there, I was standing literally in a lab. Like it had like the it had like the testing surfaces and like the water faucets and like the gas faucet thing, and like there's like racks where you can envision like Bunsen burners and beakers and all this stuff. So I made my way through, and I actually found the morgue. I found I walked in, and there was a spot where there were 4 drawers that you would open up the door and you could pull the drawers out. And in that same room, there was the ceramic autopsy table. And it was just, everything was just covered in dust and debris. Like, probably no one's been in there for years. And I'm looking at this ceramic white table and the drawers, and it made me think of the 1,300 dead people, the dead bodies that were behind the Reed Hall and the Dietary Building. With no names, just a number and a small gravestone. And as I turned to leave the morgue, in front of me in the hall, in front of the chain doors there, was an invisible ripple through reality, or through the ether. It was subtle, but enough that I could see it, dancing in the air, moving towards me. What was it? What could it have been? Was it the presence that haunts the morgue? She's in love with herself. She likes the dark. Okay. In January 2006, Dixmont was demolished. A little company you might have heard of called Walmart had bought the property, and despite locals fighting it, they planned on dropping a big goddamned Walmart superstore on it, on the top of the ruins of this insane asylum, and the 1,300 people buried there. In September, which is funny, like I could write this to death. It's like Poltergeist in a Walmart. It's great. In September 2006, a catastrophic landslide occurred, splashing 500,000 cubic yards of hillside onto 65, or Ohio River Boulevard, the highway that was closed for weeks and then reduced to only 2 lanes for months. To this day, the land where the Dixmont Insane Asylum stood is empty. Walmart opted to reforest the area by planting 7,000 trees there instead of a Walmart. Tons of great pictures of Dixmont is there online, and thanks to DixmontHospital.com and the Asylum Projects for a lot of the great info that I had in this show. Support the show, please. You can rate and review the show on iTunes. Like I said, if I missed you this week, I'll get you next week full show. If you want to rate and review, that's a great free way to do it. If you want to spread the disease with word of mouth, that's another great free way to do it. If you're like, hey, I got all this money burning a hole in my pocket and I'd really like something to read during this Halloween season, then, good sir, I would suggest you go to stigmatastudios.com and drop some money on some comic books, because that's the best way to support the show, because it helps me pay for stuff.
Stigmata Studios presents The Scorpion Strikes. In this comic book, a terrorist called the Scorpion is transported to a secret CIA prison. He quickly turns the tables on the guards and administrators and releases the prisoners. A well-armed anarchist called Constituent Zero assembles a team and fights to take the prison back. The story is a dark political action thriller. The Scorpion's actions set the stage perfectly for the Jin Jihad. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com. Stigmata Studios presents The Test of the Scorpion. In this comic book, while the Jin Jihad is raging on one side of the city, the terrorist called the Scorpion sets a secondary attack in motion as he obtains a small tactical nuclear bomb. A mysterious, ever-living warrior called Cyrus the Dead Guy steps forward to test the faith of the Scorpion and his lunatic followers. This is an action-adventure story. It's a bit of swashbuckler that wraps up the Jihad stories. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on the Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, the Test of the Scorpion, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
That's what I'm saying. It helps me pay for stuff. So I'm gearing up for Halloween. I have a Halloween tradition. I put Kenneth Anger's movie Lucifer Rising on my giant screen TV during Trick or Treat. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you could go. It's on YouTube. Actually, I was thinking about the Welcome to the Pleasure Dome thing with the Babylon Working Girl in it. The Babylon Working Girl. That's funny. That's also a comic book that I could do. I could write a story, The Babylon Working Girl. But I was thinking about putting that one on, but they're not crazy demonic. They're just weird. It's just weird. But I usually post something up on my Instagram about the Lucifer Rising and do that, and I just pass out Reese's Peanut Butter Cups to the kids that come in. Over. They don't come in. They come over. The kids that come around. Yeah, I give them Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. And we watch Lucifer Rising through the window. Every once in a while, I'll get some beers. We'll pass them out to the moms and dads that are walking around. So that's my Halloween tradition. What's yours? Do you have one? I don't know. Tell me about it. Be safe. That's the most important thing. Be safe this Halloween. Don't trust your fellow fucking men because they're all awful. I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna leave this show with something called the Dixmont song by Dan Tornay. And I'm super excited that this guy gave me permission to use this song. So we're going to do this, and then if you hang out until the end, I'll explain to you what I think about this ghost in the morgue that I saw. No, it wasn't a ghost. I said everything was covered in dust. I was just disturbing it. I've been the only person that's probably been in that room for I don't know, 7 years. Just by walking around, the dust was just getting moved. It was just dust in the light. Ghosts. Ghosts.
On Route 65 in Kilbuck Township remains a who or maybe what done it. The DEP is now drilling holes trying to determine if soil samples will solve the mystery, but that would be in the realm of the natural. People who've been living in the Emsworth area bordering the Walmart property think the answer may be supernatural. Mary Rob Jackson is here to tell you all about it. Mary Rob.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Before they ever began excavating for the Walmart Supercenter, the Dixmont State Hospital, mental hospital, stood on that property for more than 100 years. After it closed, lots of adventure seekers explored the abandoned buildings and the tunnels that honeycombed the ground beneath it. It all adds up to a good ghost story.
And still it creeps like a B horror movie, not by cubic yards of yore, but inch by inch.
Some say dynamite may have been the trigger. Others think Pittsburgh Redbed is to blame. But in this season of All Hallows evenings, there are those who wonder if the ghosts of Dixmont are afoot.
It could very well be the spirits interrupting the construction.
Dixmont Hospital for the Insane, built in 1856 and originally covering 400 acres, was like a small town containing its own post office, morgue, and cemetery.
We felt like we were being watched at all times, and we heard sounds, and we recorded some spirit energy.
That's what paranormal investigator Sherry Higgins recalls of her visit to an abandoned Dixmont in 2002, one of the many spooky places where she's recorded spirit energy orbs.
The spirits of the dead still walk the asylum there.
Closed in 1984, most of the hospital's buildings were demolished in recent years to make way for the Walmart development. What remains is the cemetery.
My concern is what's happening to the graves that are there. I really would like to know what's happening.
And there's 1,300 graves in here. All these little stones are all gravestones.
Mostly patients buried in wicker coffins and pine boxes. No names or dates, just numbers.
And this gives you the grave numbers where they are.
The Dixmont cemetery records came with the bill of sale when Ralph Stroney purchased the hospital grounds in 1998. He was born and raised on a neighboring farm.
When we were young, we used to hike up here, usually around Halloween, because there was always something strange happening.
Over the years, the Dixmont Cemetery has been a magnet for people looking for a scare.
There's a lot of people that have been up there looking, doing seances and ghost stories.
These graves were originally dug in perfectly straight lines.
Through the years, the gravestones have slid down the hill.
And as 22,000 motorists recently learned, there's more than gravestones sliding around here. But does Ralph Stroney believe in ghostly intervention?
I'm not sure, but, they're saying there were a lot of patients up there through the years that were very happy up there, had a great time up there, and they don't want the place to be disturbed. Simple as that.
Now, the Dixmont Cemetery alone still belongs to the state of Pennsylvania. Everything around it was sold. And for a time, various groups tried to keep the graves cleared of brush. Included among the dead are patients, hospital staff, and their family members, as well as 3 Civil War soldiers who died of their wounds at Dixmont. With a live report, Mary Rob Jackson, KDKA TV News.
Okay, thank you, Mary Rob.